Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really dark question. How exactly are narcissistic serial killers made? We're going to break down the precise psychological process of how a human being transforms into a monster.
He wasn't born evil. He was born damaged. But somewhere between childhood and adulthood, something switched, and he became a serial killer.
Here's the terrifying question at the center of this explainer today. Can you make a serial killer, or are they born that way? Well, the answer is both, and understanding how narcissistic killers are created is absolutely the key to preventing them. Okay, let's just dive right into this.
Section 1. Born or made?
To really get a grip on this, we've got to look at the age-old debate, right? Nature versus nurture. Criminologist Dr. Adrian Raine makes it incredibly clear in his research. It is definitely not an either-or situation. Genetics and environment actually work together to encourage violent behavior. A child might have a biological predisposition, sure, but it's the severe childhood trauma and abuse, the nurture, or honestly, the severe lack of it, that molds that raw biological material into something deeply, deeply dangerous.
Let's look closely at the biological side first. Research reveals that a specific genetic defect is highly common among criminals. It's a mutation in what's called the MAOA gene. Now, this gene produces an enzyme that's responsible for breaking down neurotransmitters, like dopamine. When this gene is defective, the individual experiences a low dopamine turnover. So what does this actually mean? Well, this defect lays a highly volatile foundation. It essentially wires the brain to be super prone to aggressive impulses right out of the gate. But, and this is crucial, biology alone doesn't pull the trigger.
Section 2. The roots of trauma.
This brings us to the tragic origin story of Edmund Kemper, who you might know is the co-ed killer. Kemper was an exceptionally bright kid. He grew to an imposing 6 foot 9 inches, but his childhood? It was entirely defined by relentless emotional abuse from his domineering mother, Clarnell. She constantly belittled him, emasculated him, just day after day. This toxicity literally pushed his fragile psyche to the breaking point. At age 15, after being sent away, he actually shot his grandparents. And shockingly, he was deemed rehabilitated and released from the state hospital by age 21, only to return right back to his mother's toxic environment, which, as you can guess, ultimately fueled his return to violence as a serial killer in adulthood.
Connecting Kemper's story back to academic research, clinical psychocriminology notes something terrifying. Profound trauma, especially abuse or neglect occurring before the age of 2, forces the psyche to repress an immense amount of hostility. The individual basically becomes a ticking time bomb. They might have a normal outward appearance, but that hides a psyche completely charged with repressed emotions, just waiting for the exact right frustration to bring it boiling to the surface.
Section 3. The narcissistic shift. So what actually happens inside the mind of a severely traumatized adolescent when they realize they can never rely on people for safety? Well, they undergo a narcissistic shift. When the outside world becomes just too painful, the ego adopts itself as the primary love object. Dependence on others becomes completely terrifying to them. To avoid the agonizing risk of further rejection or abuse, they just withdraw inward, totally rejecting normal human connection. Indifference becomes their ultimate armor.
Once this shift occurs, the individual develops some truly chilling characteristics. We're talking intense independence, absolutely zero empathy, and a profound sense of grandiosity. But more importantly, this hidden narcissism allows them to completely dehumanize their surroundings. They literally reduce human beings to mere objects. We see this exact thing in other notorious cases too, like Jeffrey Dahmer. His dark obsession began quietly in his mind, collecting animal bones, reducing living things to mere objects just to serve his own sadistic fantasies. And clinical research backs this up, proving a strong link between this type of narcissistic personality disorder and explosive rage. Why? Because their self-image is entirely built on a totally fake illusion of superiority. It's just there to protect them from their deep insecurities, so it's incredibly fragile. Any criticism, or even a perceived threat to that self-image, isn't just an insult to them. It is a full-blown existential threat that triggers violent, uncontrollable eruptions. Section 4. Signs of escalation.
Way back in 1963, psychiatrist J.M. McDonald identified a triad of behaviors common in the childhoods of highly aggressive individuals. You might have heard of it: animal cruelty, arson, and bedwetting. Now, modern research shows this triad isn't a guaranteed blueprint for a serial killer, but make no mistake, these behaviors are massive red flags. They act as early vents for profound aggression, frustration, and the deep-seated neglect that's occurring in a dysfunctional home environment.
Now, what's really crucial here is the distinction in how that cruelty is actually carried out. Criminological studies reveal that the method matters immensely. Distant cruelty, like shooting, indicates detached aggression. But close contact cruelty, things like drowning, hitting, choking, or burning, that requires the abuser to be intimately involved in the suffering. This close contact cruelty is a massive clinical indicator of intimate rage and deeply personal trauma. It heavily points toward a much higher potential for future violence against actual human beings.
And you know, these physical acts aren't just one-off events. They actually fuel a really dark, obsessive fantasy life. The perpetrator becomes obsessively preoccupied with their victim, which is often accompanied by depression or suicidal thoughts. Eventually, sadistic fantasies of murdering whoever or whatever threatens their fragile ego become completely dominant. It builds up this unbearable internal tension. As experts know, with killers like Dahmer, you don't just wake up one day and do it. It always begins in the mind.
Section 5. From Fantasy to Murder.
Okay, this is the 5-stage psychological progression that systematically manufactures a killer. Step 1. It starts with a biological vulnerability, like that MAOA gene defect we talked about earlier. Step 2. That vulnerability is ignited by traumatic child abuse and neglect. Step 3. To survive, the child undergoes narcissistic withdrawal, building a grandiose yet super fragile false self. Step 4. The pressure builds and vents through behavioral escalation, often close-contact animal cruelty. And finally, Step 5, the trigger, a perceived attack on their fragile ego that results in rage-type murder. To see what it felt like, that was 15-year-old Ed Kemper's actual explanation for shooting his grandmother in cold blood. Just let that sink in. This chilling quote perfectly encapsulates the complete lack of empathy and the cold, totally disconnected reality of a manufactured killer taking their very first human life.
Section 6. Red Flags and Prevention. The research confirms that these sudden, brutal acts, these rage-type murders, are the ultimate explosion of violence triggered when a fragile narcissistic self-image is criticized or threatened. Understanding this trigger is absolutely essential. It tells us that these individuals are basically walking powder kegs. And identifying the danger before it explodes, that is our only defense.
So here are the practical red flags we all need to be aware of. Conduct disorder, a complete lack of empathy, pathological lying, extreme and explosive reactions to minor criticism, deep social isolation, and especially close contact animal cruelty. Guys, these aren't just instances of bad behavior. They are desperate distress signals of a developing antisocial personality. Whether you're a parent, a teacher, or just someone trying to understand criminal psychology, spotting these signs early is absolutely crucial.
Narcissistic serial killers aren't born evil. They're created through trauma, lack of empathy, and zero consequences. Understanding this helps us recognize warning signs early and prevent future killers. If you ever see a child displaying these red flags, tell someone. Prevention is the only cure.
Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer diving into criminal psychology. If this brought you value and helped you understand the making of a killer, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the science of human behavior. Comment below, what surprised you most about the psychology we covered today? And remember, the next time you cross paths with a seemingly normal person, ask yourself, what might be hiding beneath the surface? Until next time, stay curious and stay vigilant.